Bruce Lee is afraid of a real fight. The words came through the loudspeakers of the Hong Kong Coliseum, and for a moment, 20,000 people forgot how to breathe. Steven Seagal stood center stage under the lights, the microphone still near his lips, his Aikido gi crisp and black, his voice carrying easily over a crowd that had come expecting an exhibition and was about to witness an execution. He was 20 years old that night, fresh off a flight from Osaka, invited as a guest demonstrator for a charity gala meant to celebrate unity between Eastern martial arts traditions. Instead, he had just used the microphone to call out the most famous martial artist alive, sitting in the front row, not 30 feet away. "Everything you've seen him do on screen," Seagal continued, gesturing toward the front row, "is choreography, real grappling, real control, real combat. Those are things he's never had to face, and I don't think he wants to start tonight." For a moment, no one moved. Bruce Lee sat in the front row in a black silk shirt, a glass of water in his hand, surrounded by his students and friends, among them Dan Inosanto, who had gone rigid beside him. Bruce did not look angry, he did not look surprised. He simply lowered the glass to the small table beside his chair, set it down without a sound, and looked up at the stage with an expression that several people in that section would describe for decades afterward and never quite get right. The arena, which had been humming with conversation and laughter only seconds before, went so quiet that the buzz of the overhead lights became audible. Near the stage, a promoter's clipboard slipped from his hand and hit the floor, and the sound of it seemed to echo. But that moment didn't start there. To understand why a 20-year-old Aikido instructor from Japan would stand in front of 20,000 people and challenge the most famous fighter on earth, you have to go back 6 weeks to a gym in Kowloon where two very different men first crossed paths, and where one of them quietly decided, without ever saying it out loud, that he had something to prove. If you want to see how Bruce Lee responded, hit subscribe, because what happened next became one of the most quietly told stories in Hong Kong martial arts history. 6 weeks earlier, Kowloon had the kind of heat that settled into a room and stayed there. The gym sat above a noodle shop on a narrow street where the smell of broth and frying garlic drifted up through the floorboards all afternoon, and the windows were propped open with wooden poles because the building had no other way to breathe. It was the spring of 1972, and Bruce Lee was by any measure the most famous man in Hong Kong. Fist of Fury had broken box office records the year before. Children in the street threw kicks at lampposts and shouted his name. Golden Harvest had locked him into a production schedule that left him almost no time to sleep, and those closest to him had begun to notice that he had stopped sleeping anyway, lying awake at night, running through choreography in his head, rewriting scenes that had already been filmed, certain that the next one had to be better than the last. Into this walked Steven Seagal. He was 20 years old, recently arrived from Osaka, where he had spent years training in Aikido under instructors who treated the art as something close to a religion. He carried himself the way young men do when they have spent their entire adult life being told they are exceptional and have never once been in a room that proved otherwise. He had come to Hong Kong on the recommendation of a mutual acquaintance, ostensibly to observe the local martial arts scene and make connections. He was given a tour of several gyms that week, and on the third day someone brought him to the gym above the noodle shop, where Bruce Lee was working with a small group of students on footwork drills. Seagal stood near the door and watched for almost 20 minutes without being introduced. He watched Bruce move through the drills fast, economical, nothing wasted. When the session ended and Bruce came over to greet the visitor, shaking his hand and welcoming him in accented but warm English, Seagal smiled and said something the two students standing nearest would later repeat, more times than they could count. He said it was impressive for choreography. Bruce's smile did not change. He thanked Seagal for the compliment, as if he had not heard anything else in the sentence, and invited him to stay and watch the rest of the session. If you're enjoying this story so far, hit subscribe, because what Seagal said next, quietly to one of Bruce's own students, is where this rivalry truly began. What Seagal said next. he said to a young student named Robert Chen, who had stayed behind to help fold mats after the others left. Seagal lingered near the door, watching Bruce speak with two visitors at the front desk. And when Robert passed by carrying a stack of training pads, Seagal stopped him. He asked Robert, almost casually, how often Bruce really sparred, full contact with someone who wasn't being paid to lose. Robert hesitated. He said that Bruce trained constantly, that the speed bag work alone was enough to break a man's hands. Seagal nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he has already decided what he believes and is only listening to measure the gap between what he believes and what he's being told. He said he understood. He said that everyone around a famous man eventually learns to tell him what he wants to hear. Then he thanked Robert for his time and left. Robert didn't think much of it that night. But over the following weeks, the comment found its way back, the way comments do in a city where the martial arts community is small and everyone trains within walking distance of everyone else. Seagal had said something similar at two other gyms, that Bruce's reputation had outgrown his willingness to be tested, that his students were chosen for loyalty rather than honesty, that the one-inch punch demonstrations that had made him famous were impressive precisely because no one in the room would ever dare stand close enough to find their limit. By the fourth week, Bruce had heard versions of it from 3 separate people. He said nothing about it directly, but Inosanto noticed that Bruce had started ending training sessions by sparring an extra round himself, full speed, with whoever was willing, something he rarely did anymore given his schedule. He noticed that Bruce had stopped laughing at certain jokes about his film work, jokes he used to laugh at easily. He noticed one evening that Bruce stood at the window of the gym for a long time after everyone else had left, looking down at the street, saying nothing. Then came the invitation to the charity gala and the news that Steven Seagal had also been invited as a guest demonstrator to perform an Aikido exhibition for 20,000 people. Bruce agreed to attend. He told Inosanto it would be a quiet evening. He was wrong. If you want to know what happened the moment Seagal took that microphone, keep watching, because what came next, no one in that arena ever forgot. The night of the gala, the Colosseum filled faster than the organizers expected, 20,000 seats, and by the time the lights dimmed for the opening ceremony, every one of them was full. The program ran the way these programs always run. Speeches, a dance troupe, a brief martial arts demonstration from a local school that drew polite applause. Bruce sat in the front row in his black silk shirt, relaxed, talking quietly with Inosanto, occasionally lifting a hand to acknowledge someone who recognized him from the crowd. Steven Seagal's segment was scheduled near the middle of the program. He walked onto the stage in his black jai, bowed to the crowd, and performed a short Aikido demonstration with 2 of his training partners. Clean, controlled, technically impressive. The applause was generous. Then, instead of bowing again and walking off, Seagal kept the microphone. He thanked the crowd. He thanked the organizers. And then, in the same warm, confident voice he had used throughout the demonstration, he said he wanted to take a moment to talk about something that had been on his mind since arriving in Hong Kong, the difference between performance and reality in martial arts. He said it gently at first, almost like a lecture, and then his eyes moved to the front row, found Bruce Lee, and stayed there. That was when he said it, the line about choreography. The line about real combat being something Bruce had never had to face. The line that ended with "and I don't think he wants to start tonight." For a moment, no one moved. Near the edge of the stage, a stagehand, who had been adjusting a light stand, stopped with his hand still on the fixture. A photographer in the second row lifted his camera halfway and then lowered it again, unsure whether what was about to happen was something he was allowed to capture. Somewhere above the stage, the spotlight operator made a small adjustment, widening the beam just slightly, as if some instinct told him the frame was about to need more room. Bruce Lee stood up. He did it slowly, without urgency, the way a man stands when he has all the time in the world and wants everyone in the building to understand that. He set the empty glass on the table beside his chair. He did not look at Inosanto. He did not look at the crowd around him. He buttoned the top button of his shirt with one hand, an unconscious gesture, the kind of thing a man does before stepping into a room he has been in many times before. If you want to see what Bruce Lee did next, subscribe now, because the next 60 seconds became legend. He stepped past Inosanto without a word. He walked down the aisle toward the stage steps, and the crowd parted for him, the way crowds part for things they don't fully understand yet, but recognize as important. He climbed the steps. He walked to the center of the stage, stopped a few feet from Seagal, and did not speak. He simply stood there, hands loose at his sides, weight even on both feet, and waited the same way he waited before every fight he had ever filmed, except this time there were no cameras, no choreography, and no one was going to call cut. Seagal recovered his composure quickly. He smiled, the same practiced smile from earlier, and gestured toward the open space at center stage, inviting Bruce in with a small bow, the gesture of a man performing confidence for an audience even as his pulse climbed. Bruce did not bow back. He simply stepped into the open space and stopped, hands at his sides, eyes on Seagal, and waited. Seagal moved first. He always moved first. He stepped in with his left hand reaching for Bruce's wrist, the entry to a standard Aikido control technique, the one he had drilled 10,000 times, designed to take the wrist, redirect the energy, and end the exchange before it became an exchange at all. Bruce's wrist was not there. He had shifted his weight half a step back and to the side, the smallest possible movement, and Seagal's hand closed on empty air, exactly where Bruce's arm had been a moment earlier. The crowd, which had been holding its breath, let out a sound that was not quite a gasp and not quite a murmur, the sound 20,000 people make when they realize they have just watched something they weren't sure was possible. Seagal reset. He came again, faster this time, both hands open, sweeping forward to trap whatever presented itself. Bruce moved inside the reach rather than away from it, closer than Seagal expected, too close for the technique to work, his lead hand already rising. Seagal's hands closed on nothing again, and in the same motion, Bruce's open palm landed against Seagal's chest, not a strike, barely more than a touch, but placed with such precision and timing that Seagal's own forward momentum did the rest. His feet, already committed to the entry, lost their footing on the mat, and he went down. He hit the stage floor in front of 20,000 people. Bruce did not follow him down. He did not stand over him. He simply stepped back, lowered his hands, and stood exactly where he had been standing before, breathing easily, watching Seagal on the ground with an expression that held no anger at all. Only the quiet, settled look of a man who had answered a question that had been asked of him for 6 weeks and had answered it completely. The Colosseum erupted. Seagal did not get up right away. For several long seconds, he stayed on the floor of the stage, and 20,000 people watched him stay there. If you want to know what happened after Seagal finally stood up, and what this night meant for both men in the years that followed, stay with this story, because the final chapter is the part almost no one remembers. Seagal got to his feet slowly. He did not look at the crowd. He did not look at Bruce. He bowed once, stiffly, toward the audience, then walked off the stage and did not return for the rest of the program. He gave no interviews that night. In the years that followed, he would speak often about his training in Japan, his years in Aikido, his philosophy of combat, but he never once mentioned Hong Kong, 1972, the gala, or the man in the black silk shirt who had answered him without saying a word. Bruce walked back to his seat. Inosanto handed him his jacket, and Bruce put it on without comment, and the program continued as if nothing had happened. Because in front of 20,000 people, that is sometimes the only way a moment that large can be absorbed by simply continuing. Bruce never spoke about that night publicly either. Those who were there, Inosanto among them, would mention it occasionally over the following years, always carefully, always in the same quiet tone people use when describing something they know sounds unbelievable, but watched happen with their own eyes. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to understand that strength doesn't always come with the loudest voice. Less than a year later, in July of 1973, Bruce Lee was gone, and the story of that night became something passed between old students and Hong Kong stunt performers, the kind of story that gets told late, after everyone else has gone home. There are men who spend their lives telling the world how dangerous they are, and there are men the world already knows. On a stage in Hong Kong, for 60 seconds in 1972, the difference between the two stood in plain view of 20,000 people, and only one of them ever needed to say a word.